On Valentine's Day, February 14, 1967, Saddleback Junior College District was born and dubbed the Sweetheart College. The first faculty faced the awesome task of creating a place where students could thrive. The heart of Saddleback College lies in those early days of discovery and historical events which shaped the lives of faculty and the students they served. This is the story of dreams and those who helped create them. Making history, Saddleback College.
I was hired at Saddleback College in August of 1968, going to work in September. But my first interview at Saddleback College, when I came down here, I didn't know what job I was interviewing for. I just said, oh, I got an interview, so here I am. And so I got here. It was kind of a general interview, and talked about me and my philosophy and the things that I'd done. Of course, I had a short haircut, which was important in those days. And from there, I got a second interview, which was very general also, supposed to be about a couple weeks later. Again, I still don't know what job I'm interviewing for. And the night before I got my final interview, Jack Roper, who was the first president superintendent, had resigned the night before the board meeting, and so I met again with the same people I'd already met with. And we went to the Mission Vale Country Club and had a couple, and that's where I really kind of found out that I had the job. But I wasn't still sure what job it was, but it was the coordinator of student activities.
Like most of the faculty from the Performing and Fine Arts through Doyle McKinney. I was at Whittier School District and Fullerton College District and taught with him for 3 years. And he went back east, and then he was hired as one of the administrators for the first year of the college. The interview was interesting because it was in a model home.
I was teaching at San Jose State, and I'd just come to San Jose State from General Electric Company. And I decided to get into teaching as what I really wanted, my passion in life. And San Jose State was more academically oriented, more theoretically oriented, not as much student oriented. So I decided to search for a community college, and I wanted to come south where the sun was, where the surf was. And so I interviewed around here in a couple of different community colleges, and I heard about Saddleback and came down here and fell in love with the idea of starting something brand new and kicking off a new program. So here I am.
I was the first full-time member who was hired other than the division chairs. I was hired before. I understand many people had different questions asked of them later on in the interviewing process because it was a very conservative board that we had in those days, and they didn't want to have any radicals. So I tried to not sound too radical, naturally, when I was being hired. but they hired me, and I came in before any of these strange questions were asked of people, like, what is your party affiliation, and things that are just totally against the law now.
Okay, I came to be hired. It was actually Jim Thorpe that hired me, and I think, I'm almost positive of this, that I was the last person hired the first year. And there was some 30 or 32 of us, and I had written this, I taught at Costa Mesa High, and I'd written this, I figured I wanted to get this job, and I'm not going to get it if I don't have something special. So I put that I was the best that there was, which I believe still. And Thorpe, to his credit, didn't hold it against me. He said some people did. He said some people thought that was arrogant thing to do and uncalled for, but I said, hell, I got to get some, you know what I mean? Instead of just routine stuff, I had to do something different. So that's how I got in here in physics. I was the last one. They were going to wait, I think, a year to hire a physicist or something like that.
It happened that my friends here told me that there was a wonderful new community college that had been voted into existence on Valentine's Day and was going to open the following year in South Orange County. And of course, this caught my attention because that meant it was within commuting distance of Laguna Beach, which is my favorite place in the whole world. What a dream to be able to teach in a brand new college and live in the place I love more than any place else in the world. And it happened that the person who was chosen to be the first dean of the Fine Arts Division was Doyle McKinney, who had been the dean of instruction at the high school where I had taught in the Fullerton district. So he invited me to apply, which I did with great joy. And as you probably know, we're talking about the 60s here. This is before there were so many legal complications to the hiring process. And the early administrators of the college who knew people that they thought were qualified and would be suitable for the job could do that. And so I flew out here in the spring and interviewed. And on my way back to New York, because of course the school year wasn't out and I couldn't not finish out the year there, I went up to the Disneyland Hotel to take the limousine back to the airport, and I had a little bit of time to wait. And I remember walking around. It was so beautiful, so clean, and the flowers just everywhere. And I cried. I realized how much I missed California and how desperately I wanted to come down here and be a part of the foundation of the new college. And it happened.
I was interviewed for a teaching job, teaching journalism, but I ended up with another job. It was one title and many jobs. I wore many hats. So I was hired as director of community services, and of course, director. We had a superintendent, president, which would be like a chancellor president now, and we didn't have the deans, we had chairman. But anyway, I was director of community services, which meant that I handled the information for the community, for the students, for the faculty, of course, programs for the faculty, and for the community, and for the students when they arrived. But it was really PR with a capital PR. We did lots of public relation. And after that, then, into teaching with the journalism after students arrived. But we had to tell them about the campus. It was voted in by the people in 1967, February 14th. I guess you've heard that story. They call it the sweetheartest of Orange County because of that. But we had to then to tell the prospective students about the college and really convince them that it was going to be a great college, and we were hiring great people, and that we were going to have great people. Because at that time, a student didn't have a choice to go to another college. You had to go to the college in the district where your residence was. And so they couldn't go to Orange Coast, they couldn't go to Santa Ana, and we wanted to tell them that they were lucky they were going to come to Saddleback College. And they were, too.
I was teaching at Costa Mesa High School, and I was teaching part-time at Orange Coast College, and I was thinking, gee, it would really be nice to teach in a community college. And my husband happened to see in the newspaper that a new college was being formed and that they were accepting applications. So I thought, oh, the timing was just right. I had taught 10 years on the high school level, and it was time to graduate. So I put in an application, and I waited, and I waited, and I was thrilled to death when I got called in for an interview. And I think it was 3 interviews before the final selection was made. So I was very fortunate. And I remember my husband said, well, don't feel too bad if you don't get it, because you'll get it next year. It was 7 years before they hired another person for what I was teaching.
I was interviewed, and I think it was in an apartment house or something like that. It definitely was not in any official kind of building. And I went upstairs and sat down in front of Fred Bremer and with Doyle McKinney. And I do remember that Doyle McKinney asked me just the right question, because I had just read an article on the new poetry, and then he asked me a question about that, and I was able to really, come on as if I knew what I was talking about. And that impressed them. Doyle McKinney looked at Fred Bremer, and he went like this, and then Fred Bremer said, well, do you like her better than so-and-so, whoever they had just decided on? And Doyle said yes. So I was the first English teacher hired.
So this.
The campus actually started up on the site where the hospital is today, Mission Viejo Hospital. And we were up there for 1 year with temporary buildings. And they hadn't purchased the land yet, and they were negotiating for the land, and then they purchased this land that the campus is on now, which is some 200 acres. And the buildings that were located up on the hospital site, temporary buildings, were moved from that site down to this site. And the lower campus that you see today are those temporary buildings. They're still there. We used to say in the service, there's nothing as permanent as a temporary building. And it proved to be right at Saddleback College, as it did at the El Toro Marine Base also, because they still have some buildings over there that are left over from World War II. And Saddleback College still has buildings left over from when we started the campus up on the hospital site.
See, the first year, we was over here where the hospital was. But that was a temporary spot. And what was funny was, well, you talk about a funny story was, they planted grass, but they wouldn't let us use the grass. The head custodian in charge of grass wouldn't let us go out there and practice on the grass because it wasn't ready enough, okay? So that's one reason we're traveling all over the place. So by the time baseball season, they claimed it was ready. But then what was funny thing about it was, then we're going to move next year. We never even touched, we never were able to even get on the grass to practice,
When our first buildings, like I said, was up at Mission Hospital, and we were in bungalows, and we traveled to football practice. We worked out at Capitol High School, the old Capitol High School, down by the Mission. There's an athletic field down there, and every day we would travel down there, get in the cars, the kids would get in the cars, drive themselves down there, and we were always worried about the insurance part of it and everything, but we didn't have buses and money enough to whatever at the beginning, and so we'd always tailgate each other, and we'd all go down to the Capitol High School down by the Mission in San Juan and work out there every day. Roy Stevens, who was our basketball coach at the time, we worked out at various gyms and community rec centers in the area, and baseball was the same way. We lived out of suitcases in the back seats of our cars and went everywhere.
And we started out in 2 model homes across from Mission Viejo High School. Only one of the model homes had plumbing, though. And as a result of that, we often were, those of us who chaired different divisions, mine was science, math, engineering, and technology, would be over in line in the other building because they had 2 bathrooms. But Jack Roper, who was then the superintendent of the district, insisted on having an executive bathroom. So he and his secretary got to use one bathroom, and about 12 of us got to use the other one.
when I came up and interviewed, the administrative offices were at just where you turn in off of La Paz Road to go to Mission High School. It was on the left side where that gas station was, just beyond that, where the administration offices. And then the college was just the portable buildings being put up at where Mission Community Hospital is now. And so then we were just in the portables there for the first year.
When I came here in September, I was in the kitchen. I had George Hartman's desk because George was at the Marine base with fall football practice. They had their actual, I think they were in dorms and the whole thing, almost like a 4-year school. So I had a desk in the kitchen of one of those model homes that they were in at the time, over there on Crescenta and in La Paz, across the street from Mission Viejo High School, which is now a gas station and medical building, I believe. So I had an office, and I was counseling students in the kitchen with a locked desk. It was very informal.
It was kind of interesting. We were all sort of jammed up in these little cubicles. The classrooms were in temporary buildings, adequate, but still kind of a temporary situation. And then they discovered that the college really didn't own the property. There was some sort of misunderstanding. And so they had to move 13 or 14 temporary buildings over the hill, and of course ran out of gas, and they thought the students had put sugar in the gas tanks. It just got to be too funny. Anyway, they finally opened this campus, and our fine arts division, along with some science and math people, were in cubicles about the size of this chair. The desk was about this wide, and there were open doorways, and so you had very little privacy to try to counsel a student or prepare your lectures or anything. But we were all excited and fun. It was a fun time.
Aligning our programs, our academic programs with the universities, which is now called articulation, we were fortunate enough to hire Bob Jacobson as a counselor, and as we grew, he became the articulation officer and dean of counseling, one of my people. And Bob was very smart, very astute man, probably the best in the state, and it's going to be a real loss when he retires, but he is smart enough to be able to coordinate our academics with many of the 4-year schools and has a very fine reputation. So he's responsible for a lot of that and working with yourself, the faculty, all the faculty, in getting those programs online. And some of them have taken years to get accepted by those universities, and it's working with them, and he's smart enough to work those out. That's an articulation agreement that's very important to the faculty, very important to our students. It's a part that we've used in the recruitment of high school students, that these are programs that are just, this isn't just a junior college, this is your first 2 years of a 4-year university, if that's the way you want to use it.
The microbiology program that we put together, or I put together, was pretty much patterned after what I went through when I went through college. When I was an undergraduate student and graduate student, I worked as laboratory assistant and student assistant in microbiology, so I had all kinds of practice in preparing materials and identifying material. I had 4 years of experience, so it went fairly smoothly, except for the fact that we didn't have much equipment. In microbiology, basic to the subject is a sterile environment. You have to have a sterile environment to grow your microorganisms in. Well, we were using pressure cookers instead of an autoclave, and this kind of stuff. And it worked out reasonably well. We got our first group of students through, all right, and then it just went on from there.
R.L. Platt, our mild-mannered dean at that time, called me and said, "Bob, we're going to start some architecture courses here." And he said, "We'd like you to teach them." And I said, "R.L., I've never taught architecture before. I've never taken an architecture course before." And he kind of casually said, "We need you, and we'll understand if you can't do it perfectly, we want you to teach it. It was really kind of a demand to teach it. So I thought a 3-semester sequential course in architectural drafting, and I'd be, you know, one page ahead of the students, and there are architecture students, people working in the architect's office, and we'd have arguments over, you know, what was supposed to be in a certain layout and what have you. So that was a big challenge in starting that program. But the engineering program and the mechanical drafting program were just a lot of effort, you know.
When I was interviewed, they wanted a jack of all trades because they couldn't hire that many people, and I was hired to be in charge of the secretarial area. And during the interview, they asked a number of questions such as, can you teach accounting, business law, economics? And I'd say, well, and try to squirm and give an evasive answer. And they said, well, could you teach intro to computers? And I said, oh, yes, that would be very exciting, because I didn't know what a computer was, but I had taught business machines. And so I was hired to teach secretarial, typing, shorthand, and introduction to computers. And there was not a computer on campus that first year.
Well, what we did was we came up with 4 or 5 different colors and 4 or 5 different nicknames. And then we went to each high school in the district. Now, we only had 5 high schools in the district, okay? That's San Clemente, Laguna Beach. Mission was a very new high school, about a year or two old, Tustin, and Foothill. So we went to each one of those schools, to the senior student body, and gave them the ballot, and they turned around and they voted. Okay? We very definitely wanted gauchos because we sort of went along with the land, but also the gauchos, I wanted to make sure we'd be able to put the gaucho G on the helmet because I was a big fan of Green Bay Packers. Okay, and that's the Green Bay G, okay? So, and then the colors, you know, came right along with it, okay? So that's why they were picked each, you know, they went all around the school and come up with those colors.
I taught journalism and started a newspaper on the side, in addition to all the other duties that I continued. And so we had classes at night and then classes during the day too. And the kind of interesting, the newspaper, the first issue was called La Prensa, which was in Spanish, meaning the press. Well, why we did that, we wanted the students to name the newspaper. So we thought, well, we'll give it a foreign name, and then they all come up with an original name. And Gauchos was the name of the sobriquet for the football team, Spanish. And so they came up with Lariat, and that's how they got the name, Lariat. You know, the Gauchos, I think it had the G, like the Green Bay Packers, which were very popular at that time. So that's why I think they selected the Gauchos, and then the Lariat was selected as the name of the newspaper.
Well, it was kind of, I guess, stealing, or whatever they call it, looking in other colleges' catalogs and seeing what their programs were, and then building the courses that we felt we wanted to start with, which were the very, very basic courses in history, in political science, and psychology and sociology, and in time anthropology. And little by little, we added to those basic courses. So when you look in the catalog today, or the schedule today, you see all these different exotic classes that cover all kinds of things that we wouldn't even imagine back in those days, because we just wanted a very basic program.
I had 6 different preparations the first quarter, 6 different ones the second quarter, and 6 more the third quarter. I think that continued for the next couple of years until we finally hired enough other math instructors so that people could have maybe only 3 or 4 preparations in a quarter. And it was just, you were on a treadmill all of the time. It was interesting.
One of the things that the faculty used to always kind of grumble about a little bit was that, and I don't remember how many years it went on, was that we had to, in the old days, the first 10 years or so, the faculty was required to stand behind the tables, and all the tickets for the classes, the ticket numbers would be in computer form in little cards, and we would have to put in hours, and the students would come through and show us, and then we would hand out the cards to each student. Well, if you're there and students are, and if you can sense that your class doesn't have enough, you could start pressing students. Well, now this class over here by this person, or me, take me. And so a lot of times students would just, oh, okay, well, what's your name, Bill Otta or something. So, but there was a lot of things going back on in those days of, it was all legal and legitimate because we had a personal contact a lot more with all the students in the first 10 years because we weren't as large, and we always had to help them at registration. That was just part of that first week of school, and it was the old time, like when you and I were, when I was in college, you'd go up and you'd go through the 22 stations and get your class cards. Well, that's the way we started here, and then some of the instructors, I think Bill Holston and Paul Brennan, used to get into little word battles with each other because they were trying to get their class larger than Paul's class in political science, and Holston, who everybody knows was, you know, the most favorite and most sought after teacher here on campus. They would used to have bids and fights between who could get to 50 first and all this kind of stuff.
Usually we start off, I think most of those, there were only about 15 in the classes to start with, and some of them I was looking there up around 18 to 20, 22, but they're actually are some of the better students. You know, back then there was still such thing called as the draft for the military, and so it wasn't dropping out of school as much, and when no one drops, it's hard to be the first one to drop. When you have a half a dozen drop, it's easy for you to drop out. And the students were pretty good.
The program was structured. I think there was a thought then, even academically, with the academics, that we hire good high school teachers and counselors, and we train them in the Saddleback way, whatever that was.
In the summer between the first and second year, when those buildings were getting ready to be moved, we had to get out. And so the department chairs worked in the summer, but we moved over to Crown Valley Elementary School, where the prized possession at Crown Valley Elementary School was an adult-sized chair, because there was only one in each room, and we were in offices, and they stored most of our equipment and down in some storage areas over by Forbes Road off Crown Valley Parkway. And not all of it showed up again when we moved back into the buildings after they'd been moved.
Bobcats.
Mud.
Rats and varmints.
Huge massive frogs.
Snakes.
Deer.
Rattlesnakes.
Raccoons.
Bunnies.
Coyotes. N building was where all of the faculty were, and probably started the togetherness. That first year, N building was a bullpen. You didn't have offices in it. You just had, the whole thing was open, and you had your office mate would be whoever you backed up your desk to. So there were a whole series of desks that were backed up to each other. And if a phone call came in, hey, Gene, you've got a phone call on line 1 or something like that. It was, so everybody was all together in this N building, and we did, any of the handouts to students were done on a ditto machine. Do you remember the old ditto machines, the old purple things that, I mean, you'd just be purple from head to toe. It was a wild time. Then we got a mimeograph machine. Then you could be blue and black at the same time. So the next year it was decided that there wasn't much privacy, so they built offices in N building, except they built them and they were individual offices, but they looked like toilet stalls. And there was just room enough for a file cabinet, your desk, your chair as a faculty member, and one other chair for a student to sit at. So it was really tight. But the funny part about it was that everybody on 3 cubicles to either side and across the hallway could hear every word that was being exchanged between student and faculty members. So there was no privacy anyhow. But it was a funny looking building.
We were, the women, were told that we could not wear slacks, capris, golfing shorts, tennis dresses, anything that revealed that we were not really proper ladies. So we all almost had to pass this dress code. One of the questions in interviewing for the job was, will you back us up with this dress code business? You know, we have to have shoes and shirts and cut hair. You can't have ponytails. You can't have earrings. Boys can't have and so we all sort of laughed at that.
And when we were building, you know, the chemistry building, when they were putting in the fume hoods and they were going to be downdraft, fume hoods went down underneath the building, you know, or underneath the room, so you didn't see the pipes blocking your view. But the plan, you know, just didn't work. They started in the chemistry end with a 9-inch pipe, and it kept getting a little larger as it went down. And there's a break between the chemistry and the biology section, and then it gets picked up from the biology. And then finally, the second to the last lab. So there are 5 labs, and then the second to the last lab, the pipe is 40 inches in diameter. And I try to tell them, well, they're going to suck students out of the biology lab before they move any fumes out of the chemistry, because the break in the building, every time it goes around a 90-degree turn, you lose a great percent of the flow of air. And so when we would have when I was teaching the Chem 1C, where we had the hydrogen sulfide, the fumes were so bad in there that I had lost essentially all my sense of smell. I couldn't smell what gasoline smells like, couldn't smell like perfume or any of it. And then they said, well, you put fans in the doors, we'll share the well.
Every night during the week, I'll go in two players' home every night and visit the parents and all. And see, we had lots of rumors going around, because the rumors going around that we're going to be going to school in tents and all that stuff. And lots of people up in Tustin was very upset because their students were always going to go to Saddleback College. So it was up to me also to straighten all that out and visit with the parents and show them what type of program we were trying to help and everything. And we got good reception from the parents once, but I was in there every night with the parents in the house, okay? But it was I gained weight with all the goodies,
There was a lot of dirt, and the surrounding hillsides were covered with dry grass and cactus. And there was a little pavement from one building to the other, and there was one patch of green lawn that I recall, with a flagpole and the state and national flag flying on it. And when you come on campus in the morning, Fred Bremer was always sort of patrolling around just to see if you were dressed properly and that sort of thing. The women were not allowed to wear pants or long skirts, which were in fashion then. So we were kind of checked to make sure that we were, kosher.
I think, just working with administration was a challenge. And, when I was at San Jose State, we had a few riots there. I couldn't teach a few classes because of tear gas, And so the board and the administration was very attuned to the issue of rioting in colleges at that time. So basically they came here in a mentality of the students and the faculty are potentially dangerous. So they tried to hire conservative faculty. I don't think it exactly worked that way. And, you probably heard the dress codes, and both for the faculty and the students, flag salutes in the morning. It was like shocking for me to be walking across campus, even though I knew it happened. Somehow I had never been out on campus when it happened. I think it was like 8 o'clock in the morning they'd play the national anthem over outside speakers. People would stop and put their hand over their chest. It was like, holy mackerel. I mean, the whole student body, everyone would stop. So they were like in this mentality that, hey, we're going to keep this campus cool. We're going to keep the students with short hair, the faculty with ties, but we don't want anything to get out of hand. So they were a little difficult to deal with.
I think our college started with the idea that a dress code, or at least some part of saying this is the way it's going to be. It happened to be the dress code. It could have been something else, and saying we're going to have control. And that was part of going back to the federal money. We want to have control. We don't want anybody telling us what to do. This is our college. And those 5 board members pretty well lived that way and believed that way, and that was their philosophy. I think that the one story going back to the dress code, though, was that I usually was at the first station of registration. That's where the screening took place of mainly the boys and the hair length. The girls, wasn't a big problem. There was supposed to be a skirt length, but I don't think anybody paid any attention to that other than to look. In this case, it was the boys' hair that was a big thing. It couldn't be over the collar or over the ears. And so here comes Rudy, my barber from Laguna Beach, downtown Laguna. He's still barbering, styling now. He comes to the first station of registration, and guess who's there at the first station? Jack. I said, Rudy, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to register. Your hair's too long. And so Rudy wasn't able to register. And I don't think I went back to get a haircut from him either.
There were some policies that the board made that we didn't like. The clipping the hair policy was one that most of the faculty was not really very happy about. And in fact, there were some clashes when they tried to enforce that by pulling people out of the classroom and telling them they had to get haircuts. They basically said, you guys should be doing this outside of the classroom. And we wrestled with that issue, and it got resolved eventually. The board sort of backed off the policy, although they went to court and won the right to tell students that they have a dress code and a hair code, at least in the lower court. But they actually had abandoned it before that, because one of the members of the Board of Trustees wouldn't have been able to be a student here because, back in the 70s, the hairstyles were changing, getting longer and so forth. And Pat Backus was a little hipper than the rest, and he had longer hair. So it would have been interesting if they hadn't backed off that policy.
Now, of course, there was challenges with the students. We're talking about the Vietnam period. And so we had a period where students were advocating free speech to the extreme. And on the other hand, perhaps there was a bit of regimentation to the extreme that was in conflict. The board had a policy and the administration had a policy, they loved the term no nonsense. And the students, on the other hand, they wanted free speech. So a dress code was instituted. And that caused a problem because on the college level, the students thought that they were being mistreated. It was a time, too, I suppose, that the people who were involved in music wanted to have their long hair to portray the image that they thought they should portray, but they had to cut their hair if they wanted to come to the college. And so this caused some a strife and a challenge. But it was resolved. We had two, you had those who were opposed to the Vietnam War, and then you had veterans of the Vietnam War who returned to the campus. So we had two factions. We had official flag raising on campus at that time that was supported by the veterans who had returned, and of course, the others didn't relish the effect that they were supposed to get out of their cars at the time, like a base, and watch the flag being raised.
We didn't have any medical insurance. And we went along for about 3 years without medical insurance. And so one day I went into Dr. Bremer and I said, how about working up some sort of a medical insurance program? And Dr. Bremer says, oh, well, the board will never go for that. They'll never go for that. I said, well, why don't we work it up and try it? He says, well, okay, if you want to. He says, it's your time, go ahead. So I found out who the insurance agent was for the board at Saddleback College, which was an insurance agency up in Tustin. So I went up to Tustin and walked in and started talking to the people up there. And I said, we need a health insurance program at Saddleback College. I said, do you think you can work one up? They said, oh, yeah, sure, we can work without, oh, yeah, I'm going to make money on this. So I said, well, let's work it up and we'll present it to the board. So they worked it all up, and we scheduled it on the agenda for the board, and the insurance people showed up, and I made the presentation, and they kind of backed me up. And Dr. Bremer was there, of course, saying, they'll never approve this, they'll never approve that. So when I got through with my presentation, one of the board members, Hans Vokel, his name was, I don't know if anybody else has mentioned him, but he leaned forward and he looked down at me and Dr. Bremer, and he says, now, that's what we need in this district. And Dr. Bremer went, I mean, look, oh, yes, Hans, that's what we need in this district.
Early on, getting involved in faculty politics was a challenge for me. The first year I was here, I was somehow appointed, elected, or something as grievance chairperson. Well, see, at that time, nobody had tenure, and there was a lot of controversy about, regulations and so forth. So there were some confrontations and some challenges in meeting that role, and that was kind of interesting.
One of the funniest things, I guess, that happened was one of Joanne Bennett's students, I think this was probably the second year, took off all of his clothes and put a hood over his head and ran through the faculty offices. And it was like Porky the movie, well, I think I could identify him because he had a wart.
I think it's really neat not to make it just applied math, but to actually understand physics. And I had this Vietnamese girl, Quang, I'm not positive, but I'd never forget this. We had this quite difficult lab to do, and she was almost legally blind, and you have to look through this telescope and Millikan's oil drop experiment to measure the charge on the electron. So I had people working on this, and it's kind of tedious. I did it when I was at Oxy, and I said to her one day, she turned this thing, I said, did you really measure this? She said, and she kind of hesitated. I said, now how much time did you spend? Did you really measure? Well, I just sort of copied it from her. But then she decided she was really going to do it. And she's probably spent, 20, 30, 40 hours doing it. And, I sort of caught her, and she decided, all right, I will do really do the right thing. I thought that was a great story.
And it's funny, I was thinking about that first group of students and how diverse they were. There were, of course, the students who were fresh out of high school and total innocence, new to the world. And there were the returning students and the older students. Leisure World was new at the time, and the college being here was an exciting opportunity for people who were moving there. And then, of course, this was in the middle of the Vietnam War. And there were students who were here as wannabe hippies, the people from my hometown coming over from Laguna Beach with their beads and their prairie skirts. And some of the young men who were here because they didn't want to be drafted. And then there was a sizable group of veterans who had just come back from combat. So you had these four groups of people who were all, in a way, in their backgrounds so different, and yet, as I say, in that first group of students, became like a big family. And I think it was so good for them, and I know it was so good for me, because I was very young and in a lot of ways inexperienced at the time. And just the opportunity to be with those people and to work with them and to get to know them was one of the most wonderful aspects of those early years.
My favorite school story, I think, is I actually did do this. when we were on the original campus, there wasn't enough electricity, and I knew where the electric panels were, where the circuit breakers are. They weren't too far from the physics building. So afternoon, the power would go off, and it was pretty routine, particularly at the beginning of school when it was hot. So I had stuff going on in lab. I needed electricity. So I would actually go over to where these circuit breakers were and turn off the administration building. I turned off Fred Bremer and whoever else was down there and turned on physics. Now, ultimately, they caught me and they locked it up and said, okay, you can't be doing that. But I thought my priorities were appropriate, that I should. And physics needed the power more than the paper shufflers. You know?
When we were in the first year on this campus was still in a temporary between, and so we were chemistry on one side and the physics on the other, and the stockroom was in between. And I was going into the stockroom to get something, and Bob Parsons was there, and pretty soon he started backing away from the blackboard. And he backed away where the students were, and so I stuck my head in the door and I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "There's a hornet. There's a hornet right over by the blackboard where he was writing." So I walked over there and I took one swipe and I knocked it down onto the floor, went over and stepped on it. And I said, "Any of these students causing you problems?"
We had a number of students that ended up being the outstanding business student, or the outstanding, they called it data processing in those days, and that went on to join the staff. Lola Attinger was one, and she was hired. She was an outstanding secretarial student, and she was hired full-time. And Pat Sullivan, that is still very much a part of our business division, was an outstanding student that was then hired as a full-time faculty member.
I don't know if people mentioned that, you know, the athletic, the volleyball courts and basketball courts are right within the, you have to pass them, go to some classes, and go to the parking lot. So a lot of us faculty playing volleyball with the students and what have you. And then there's students kind of getting our case like we're getting old or something. I was only 27 at the time, but it was like, you guys are old, you're not capable. So we organized the first and only intercollegiate three-man basketball contest. And so myself and Roy Stevens was the basketball coach, and Bob Parsons, who had played basketball in college. And then we got the best student, Eric Christensen, and we won. And we're currently the three-man basketball champion of Saddleback College, because they never had it again.
When we first came over to this campus on the lower part of it, T building, I was able to get a greenhouse, a small greenhouse. And everything was going along well there until one day the superintendent president called me in and wanted to know what those marijuana plants were doing in the greenhouse. Well, evidently I had a young student at that time who thought that was a good place to put them together, so that was kind of funny. So I had to talk my way through that.
But I think one of the longest lasting student experiences that I was involved in had to do with the Vietnam War. And we had some Green Berets, and several of them were in my art appreciation class. And UCI at that time came over with a group of students in buses to take down our American flag. And that didn't work at all, because the Green Berets got elbow to elbow. My students jumped out of the classroom, started opening classroom doors. Hey you, ex, whatever they called each other. Get your out here. And so they stood like this and like this, and told UCI students that this was their campus and they were not going to take the flag down. So the faculty was all sort of standing around the buildings on the outside watching what was going to happen. But these wonderful students just took care of the situation, ushered these kids back onto this bus, and away they went back to UCI. And that was the last we saw.
Probably one of the funniest was during registration when everybody in the faculty had to work registration, the registration line, way before computers and phone-in registration and all that. So the student actually came to the registration station, first station, with the little ticket in hand, and was screened as far as the dress code is concerned, which you may want to know more about later. And so if you passed the test at the first station of the dress code, then you got to come in. And there was a station for each division then in, I think it was S building or R building, Q building. How about Q building? And that's where each faculty division was represented. So you had a chance to recruit your own students in those days. And so that's where some counseling went on as well from the faculty themselves. And counseling was represented there, all the divisions, so you had a chance to meet students. And I think one of the story was probably that a young man showed up. He had long, long hair. And he showed up with a body cast that he had borrowed from a friend. So the body cast came up to the neck, and he was able to tuck his hair into the body cast. And he tried to get through registration that way.
We were asked, the first group of teachers, of faculty, were asked to act as not chaperones, but ushers and kind of oversee the first or second graduation. And it was kind of an interesting challenge. So our friend, Pat Gregnon, always had us ladies down to her house in Dana Point for lunch. And she said, I'm taking all my clothes off except my underwear. And we'll put our gowns over the top of this, and we will go to this graduation, which we did after about a quart of wine. So here we are in these black, shiny, with just our undies on underneath it. So that's the way we met challenge. I mean, we got together and we just had fun with it. So it was never really threatening. We had a couple of really strong women, and I have to thank Jean Vincenzi for acting as our sort of spokesperson and helping us kind of laugh at the situation, although I understand she has an ulcer over all that activity. But we kept our sense of humor, and so the challenges to making the classroom work turned out to be tons of fun. I mean, we took it with a sense of humor, seriously, but in the end, we felt that we were the winners, the survivors.
You be out here in football practice, and you got deer walking around, and we have rattlesnakes all over the place, you know. And we actually have people at lunchtime. A couple of times they were sitting on blacktop, and the rattlesnakes come out, and they reach back, and we had a couple people bitten by rattlesnakes.
Well, I had just a few years ago a woman who went through this campus after having been attacked, having her face disfigured and blinded, who came to class with her dog. And even though she couldn't see the blackboard, listened because I'd had some blind students before, and I'd kind of learned that if you repeat everything you're writing on the blackboard, they've developed the skill to listen to that. She got an A in the class, and I blatantly used it to shame a few of the other students in the class who complain about, you're going too fast or something like that. Well, she's getting it. And she's getting perfect scores on the quizzes. So the fact that we deal with such a wide range of people, the best thing that I ever did at Saddleback College turned out to be the Interdisciplinary Studies program, which unfortunately has kind of petered out. But at the time, we won a couple of awards from the National Endowment for the Humanities. It really was Bob Lombardi and Jody Hoy's idea, but we had a group of people get together and create these courses which were cross-disciplinary, and we have as many as 6 faculty members, 120 students, and then we met in small group sections too, and we brought in all kinds of great people. One of the great experiences under this program was jointly with Fine Arts and Doyle McKinney. Maya Angelou came here to do a joint session of all of our interdisciplinary studies classes, room 313, I remember, just packed. And she was working on a musical, which she sang for us a cappella. And then getting a chance to go to Doyle's house and meet with her afterwards as one of the faculty was a great thing. We had one of my former Harvard faculty members, who at the time was named Richard Alpert, but little did I know at the time was doing experiments with Timothy Leary and later on went to India and became Baba Ram Das, and he came in robes and sat cross-legged there and on the desk in front of the room and shared philosophy. Unfortunately, what we found out was that the guy had kind of come full circle, and now he was doing corporate seminars to help corporate executives get in touch with themselves.
I liked it when we were small because we had lots more close-knit. We knew everybody. For example, even the first 2 or 3 years, the faculty, you know, I remember after every football game, we'd have a party, get together at somebody's house, and the whole faculty would come besides the coaches, you know. But now you get so big, you lose contact with people, you know. You never see anybody you work with, you know.
Oh, I think the biggest change was one of attitude, and it was so good to have a loosening up. In the beginning, there were so many restrictions on dress, and it was very structured, very, very structured. And probably for good reason. The building that we're sitting in right now looks like a fort, and it was built like a fort because at that time it was felt that we needed a fort in order to save ourselves from these radical students who were having sit-ins and threatening the administration. So the attitude that caused this building to look as it looks left about, I'd say, well, by the time Dr. Lombardi came on, things had changed considerably. And there was a great loosening up. And then we went through a period of time when we got to try all kinds of new things. We sat in circles. We got to experiment with teaching methods. And I really enjoyed that time. Then it kind of settled down into using the best of the past and the best of the experimentation. And I think Saddleback, at least the time I retired, which was in 1986, but at the time I retired, a good meeting place had come between the tightness and then the experimentation.
You noticed how I dressed today for this interview, because this was the accepted dress at the time when the college started. The order was that all men had to wear coat and ties, and women could not wear pantsuits, they had to wear dresses. And that was the order of the day. And so this is the way that it was. Now, you want me to contrast it with today? Just walk around the campus and take a look. I see some instructors teaching classes in shorts, which would not have ever happened in those days, you see. And also I knew one or two of the instructors, they only had one coat. So they had to wear the same coat every day. Of course, you could take the coat off in the classroom, but you had to wear a tie. And again, some of them had very few ties and never wore ties, and so they did with what they had and to get by. But that was one big change.
We started out with, I think it was right around 1,000 students that first year. And of course now it's, what? I don't even know, 27, 28,000. As a result, you get the splintering of groups so that you don't have people who are majoring in the fine arts having any contact whatsoever with the people who are majoring in the sciences or mathematics. And in those days you did. I mean, just by necessity, you had to. They were all in the same classes. There weren't that many classes. None of the classes were larger than 30. That's all that the rooms would hold. we didn't have any more room. So that was obvious. The acceptance of a statement from a person in authority it became quite changed as I finally finished up my teaching career.
I think, as being a faculty member that's been here and seen every change that's happened at one time or another, I would have to say that the beginning faculty people would be very excited about each building as it opened up. Because like I said earlier, we would walk from down below all the way up to the library, and most of the time we didn't come up unless we had to come up. As soon as the science math building got in, that was the number 2 building. I'm pretty sure that was it. Then we started then they had more classrooms, and then the campus started being split more, but you had reasons to come up here and everything. But again, the openings for those kinds of things was really exciting back in those days, because a lot of people don't realize that former Governor Ronald Reagan was here on our campus. He helped do some groundbreaking way back in the beginning, and there were a lot of dignitaries back then used to go to these things, where now if things open up, it's just if you can get your local mayor from Mission Viejo, that you're doing good. But back then you'd get, because there were a lot of money from state funds and things like that coming in, and the governors and people would come through, and it was neat to be seeing those people and talking to those people and things like that. But it was an exciting time, I think, the buildings and things. And then as we added some sports as we went along, because we only started with about 5 or 6 sports, and now we're up to men and women, somewhere around 17 or 18 men's sports.
When we first started off, we were, being a small group of only 28 the first year, and then a complement of about the same number the next year. And so we were a family. And we used to, on Friday afternoon, after classes were over, we'd usually go down and play pool at some place and have a beer or two. And then as the place kept getting larger and larger, you sort of lost those things.
We spent several years on what's called the lower campus and building in, and we saw the library building go up, and we saw the math science building go up, and we saw the liberal arts building go up, as we were still in building in, and eventually we got the business science and general studies building. So just the change of the looks of the campus through the years with the buildings.
Along the way, you get segmented and departmentalized, and you lose a little bit of that immediacy of we all stayed here till 4 o'clock in the morning, and we didn't have any lunch or dinner, but we did it together. So, like everything else, it's a trade-off. But it's been thrilling to see the college grow in terms of physical facilities, in terms of certainly staffing. Think of all the great people who were brought on. Even from the second year, we started to pick up wonderful, wonderful staff members. And then the phenomenal growth in the student body, from 1,000 students to whatever it is now. I think at the time I retired, it was 28,000, and it's probably more now. And to see the college become such a vital and almost taken for granted asset to the community. It's there for everybody, from the kids fresh out of high school to the probably emeritus students that I saw as I was coming up from the parking lot today, coming up to the campus on a Saturday morning to enrich their lives. That the college really does reach out to every facet of the community. And of course, that's what you want a college to do, so that's very exciting.
The changes that I've seen are the growth of the institution, of buildings, a beautiful, beautiful campus and buildings. But I don't know that we have the togetherness, the teamwork that we used to have in the old days. And they say you never go back to the old days, but I think we were more of a team in the first 10, 15 years. And having been here 30 years, as you grow, you lose track of people. You aren't able to make contact with those people on a daily basis, like when we were a small school of 800 students in 1968. So it's difficult that way. You lose something.
as far as the heart's here.
I think that the community college is, the whole idea of it is germane to what I think we should be focusing on as far as education in this country. It's open for everyone. It's I've had contact with students who have been anywhere from 16 to 80 years old, and this has just been, for me personally, it's been such a widening experience. I thank Saddleback.
I think it was a great experience. I really enjoyed being here. I taught here for 30 years of my life, which is a little over half of it. And so, you know, I have a real strong feeling for Saddleback College and what happened here.
I asked my son the other day, I said, what would you say about the faculty here? Because he not graduated, but he came here for a couple of years, 10 years ago. And he said, they're substantial, you know, and that's substantial. He said, and in addition to being substantial, they have a passion for their work, and they really understand their subject matter. And somehow, I don't know, the word substantial stood out for me. There's a quality about the faculty here of substance, of integrity, of wanting what's best. And even through all these crises and what have you, that substantialness and passion for their subject matter and passion for teaching has held the school together and created really a great learning environment. So I think that's the best thing.
And we had student and faculty picnics on campus with tons of things like throwing eggs at each other and catching them, riding piggyback on Frank Sherrata shoulders, stomping on balloons and each other's feet. I mean, it was a panic. Really wonderful memories.
This is a really good job for the reason that most people here know, and that is that you're free to teach, you're paid well to teach, you have good, by and large, good students. You do not have to do research, and research is a problem. I've been there, you've probably been there. I've been to UCLA where people didn't have the time of day for you. They had to do this publish or perish deal, and I think the community college system is just a marvelous deal, and I think it's an incredible bargain. And high school students, if you're watching here, go here. Don't go unless you have some reason to go to UC Berkeley or something, because this is a much better deal. And to the faculty, you can't have a better job than this. You paid well, you have reasonable hours, you have a nice area. I mean, how can you beat it?
To begin with are the students, people that have come through that I've had in class, the athletic teams of certain individuals always come in. I think we have a lot of great faculty people. Len, I've known you for many, many years. We see each other 3 or 4 times in a year or 2 times a semester, but there's a real strength, a camaraderie here at Saddleback. In some ways, I think Irvine Valley has their camaraderie, but we don't really intermingle too much because they have different kinds of problems than what we have here. And I think overall, we're real close in many, many ways here, even though when there's a lot of friction and things going on in the area, people kind of back off a little bit. But when people have to come together, I think we're real good about that here.
I cannot separate it from what was happening in my personal life also. So it was special to me as a person because it gave me a chance to express myself in a way that I truly love to do. I always felt that I was cheating somebody because here I was doing exactly what I wanted to do, the freedom to do it in a way I wanted to do it, and I got paid for it. And there were times when they had to remind me to come pick up my paycheck. It's not because I didn't need the money. I certainly did need the money, but I wasn't working for the money. It was a pleasure the whole time.
I think we are special, exceptional, because of the way we started with the faculty that we started with the students in the area. As I went into counseling from administration, I like to say to parents and students, we're good because you are good. We are in an area where we have a lot of things to be thankful for. Excellent high schools, excellent high school teachers, excellent high school students that feed into Saddleback. And I think that's one of our real strengths is, one, we're still able to have small classes. We have still outstanding faculty, and we're inexpensive. Not cheap, inexpensive. And if you really want those kinds of things, you're not going to find them at four-year schools. You're going to find them here. And I like to, as I was doing the outreach for the college, to be competitive with those people, because sometimes those four-year school people are kind of sit back, well, we get all these students anyway. We got 35,000 students. So I like to say, we have something special to offer you. We have small classes. We have a faculty that cares about you. You're going to get to know the faculty if you want to, and vice versa.
I thought it always had a good reputation as being an outstanding educational institution. And I think that was, one of the things. And you look at the type of people that were hired. I was, as I had said before, president of the statewide California Association of Chemistry Teachers. Gene Vincenzi and Jim Thorpe were statewide on, academic senate, geology. Minch was the head of statewide, in geology, and so faculty were involved in education, not only in teaching.
It's hard to say. I mean, there were so many things. The people I worked with, the students, the excitement of developing new programs, just being a part of it all.
Special thing been that we've, in my athletic field, that we have some outstanding, just real good citizen people, students that comes through here, and had great backing from the parents, and the students give you everything you ask for. I always say 110%. Not 100%, 110%.
I enjoyed it all. I think maybe the thing that stands out most is my love for learning. And when I came here, I became a true lifelong learner because I was one of the first students to ever enroll in a class at this college. My number was in the hundreds. So that stands out as one of my great experiences here at this college. And I've taken many courses and enjoyed them all, learned a lot, and still love learning.
Now, community college is very unique. We didn't really have those in Ohio, and they've gone to where I grew up, and they've gone to kind of off-campus centers of the universities, and I don't think they work quite as well as the community college is really an apt name because we do all kinds of things, and we're really integrated into the community, and most of us live here or close to here, and so we participate in the lives of the students in and out of the classroom, and they in ours.
Well, thinking back, though, you sit back and you read the pages of history. Today, sometimes I think, damn, wouldn't it be fun to tear it down and start all over again?